On.
Welcome to the reality show, day 81 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Marco and Richard and Morgan. Today we're going to talk about a couple of op-eds that were published yesterday in newspapers in New York. One of them that we're going to talk about later is an op-ed by Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The title of that is our three prerequisites for peace. I have a lot to say just about the title, but we'll get to that later. Our main topic today is the title, the op-ed written in published in the New York Times. The New York Times gave their readers the kind of Christmas gift that they know probably if you are a reader of the New York Times, this is what you want to see on Christmas, which is an op-ed by the mayor of Gaza, the mayor, who is, of course, a Hamas appointed mayor. The title of that is Our Lives. I am Gaza City's mayor. Our lives and culture are in rubble. So we're gonna start with that. But okay, let's not me start with that. Morgan.
We're starting with the Gaza op-ed.
Yeah. I don't know. In some ways I can think of either of them as being worse, but I think we will start with the Gaza one.
Sure. So this is an op-ed that's the mayor of Gaza opining that Israel is not only destroying just, I guess, the buildings of Gaza or whatever, but it's destroying the Gazan way of life. And so he's complaining about, amongst other things, or he did complain about, amongst other things, the destruction of the trees in Gaza. And he said, why did the Israelis have to destroy the trees? Which I thought was a particularly odd thing to complain about, as if the trees and the way of life were the real casualty of the war compared to all the people. It's often been pointed out that Hamas doesn't really care about the lives of the people in Gaza. And this article, perhaps it wasn't intended to be, seemed rather callous about the lives of the people. It is kind of lamenting that in a way, but to bring up the trees at all as if they were in any way comparable was a bit ridiculous. And I also think, I'll just echo your point, Razi, that there was something particularly disgusting about the New York Times choosing to publish an article from this guy. And he also laments at one point that he seems to have been the target of Israeli attacks. And yet, of course, he is someone organized in the running of this kind of micro-state. So, of course, he is a target. He, amongst other things, was implying that Israel is just there, in a sense, perpetrating destruction for destruction's sake. And one of the examples he gives is that his house was the subject of a direct attack, which killed his son, which is, of course, in a certain sense, tragic in the sense that his son was probably just a teenager, probably didn't really have anything to do with this. But he said that he wondered whether he was the target of the attack. Of course he was. This is a guy who's organized in the running of this basically terrorist state. So this was a dispiriting article to read generally, and also just strange in its emphasis. But I don't know what you guys thought.
Marco, Richard.
Well, it's really sad after 81 days to read something like this from a Western paper. The New York Times at this point must have gone out of their way to chase this guy and get hold of him and get him to write, if he indeed wrote himself, about how the cultural assets of Gaza, a renowned place before this war for international tourism. It was a real heaven, wasn't it? Just look at it on Street View, on Google. Anyone can do it and see what kind of shithole there was. All the billions that the UN has been pouring in that place in the last 15, 20 years. Where did it go? Oh, underground, literally underground. Build infrastructure for the savage animals who hold the leash of this idiot, this Hamas mayor of Gaza City. I mean, let's remember that these guys currently are holding over 120 people hostage, people that were kidnapped from Israel, a few miles away from where they are. And they've got the goal to publish a paper giving him effectively a veneer of respectability and humanity. And I don't know at this point who's worse, whether the Hamas mayor or the New York Times people.
Yeah, I mean,
if evil is a parasite, then the host is the New York Times in this case, and they are the enemy within. And same as at the BBC here, for example, I mean, they're giving a megaphone and a platform to a terrorist group. And would they do the same for other terrorist groups, the ones that they really abhor? Certainly not. And I think, I mean, you were talking in the Daily Objective just before this about the Oslo Accords, and Razi, your 11-year-old's understanding of peace in the Oslo Accords, and you hear the word peace and double thumbs, peace is a good thing, right? And that's the attitude they're going to with the 11-year-old style mentality of New York Times readers. They're going to the we like trees, we don't want to see trees destroyed. That's why we're against trees being destroyed. We like culture. We like going to the opera. We like cultural events. We don't like to see that destroyed. So all of it is honed to focus on what would offend and appall New York Times readers with a myopic, blinkered vision of the subjects that are being spoken about, devoid from all context and all other relevant factors in this. So well, that's certainly my first take on it.
Yeah, and on the question of who they give a platform to, so Thomas Friedman, who's a regular columnist in the New York Times for many decades, I think, wrote, and we talked about it, I believe, on the reality show a few months ago. He talked about there were negotiations between Israel and Saudi Arabia about what they call a peace deal or some sort of establishing of diplomatic relations, and he wrote that Saudi Arabia should not sign such a deal because it legitimizes Israel's government. So where the New York Times stands, it stood even before this op-ed, and there was one paragraph. I wanted to start with actually a paragraph that's not at the start, but might answer your question, Marco. You kind of threw out the question: did he write it himself? Now, if we do assume he writes it himself, he wrote it himself. I can tell you one part that he didn't write himself, which is in part of this paragraph. So this paragraph goes: the Israeli invasion has caused the deaths of more than 20,000 people, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. That part is not his. I guarantee you that. That's something that after the Al Ali Hospital blood libel, where the West repeated the lie of Hamas that Israel bombed the hospital and killed 500 people. We later found out Israel didn't bomb the hospital. It was a Palestinian rocket, and nowhere near 500 people died. They're now still giving the numbers that Hamas puts out, but they say this is the Gaza Health Ministry. Now, some say it as this is the Gaza Health Ministry run by Hamas. To their credit, if I can say it that way. Here they didn't put it that way, but they did say the Gaza Health Ministry, which I think is enough of an accusation for anybody who follows closely enough, though I don't know if it's enough for the New York Times readers. So it could be kind of lip service, knowing that, as I'm sure they knew, that they would be criticized for this op-ed. So the paragraph goes: the Israeli invasion has caused the death of more than 20,000 people, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, and destroyed or damaged about half the buildings in the territory. Again, these are numbers that I wouldn't necessarily trust, although if they are correct, I would say that is about halfway there in terms of how many I'd like to see destroyed. Then he adds, the Israelis have also pulverized something else: Gaza City's cultural riches and municipal institutions. Now, we've been talking about this on the channel repeatedly, but it is the culture, the Palestinian culture, which allowed Hamas to flourish. These ideas are not, the Hamas ideas are not in contrast to the prevalent ideas in Palestinian culture. And we talked about this last week on the reality show. We talked about how Noah Argaman was a hostage, who is a hostage, was taken probably not by Hamas themselves, but by a Palestinian mob who just heard that the gate, the fence had been torn down in some areas, and just marched into Israel to take part in whatever they could. We of course have seen the videos of what happens when the soldiers or civilians or bodies that were brought back into Gaza, how the mob reacts to that. So the cultural institutions should be torn down. The culture should be in rubble. Unfortunately, it isn't, but let's hope that this op-ed, which is full of lies, actually comes true? Morgan.
Well, I agree very much with what you said there. That it is the way of life he's lamenting, which is very much part of the problem, particularly the anti-Semitism. Just something else that he said in the article, which I thought was highly offensive, and people ridicule people who meant things being offensive nowadays. But I think there are times where you should probably say something really offensive, which was, he started one of the paragraphs towards the end of the article by saying, when Israel began its war on Gaza in response to the October 7th attack by Hamas. Now, the latter part of that sentence where he says, in response to the October 7th attack, is really, I think, is really just plausible deniability to basically the insult, which is the beginning of it, which is that the suggestion that Israel had any initiation in this war at all, as if Israel is not responding to what went on. Now, it's in a sense acknowledging it, but there's just the way it's worded just seemed like a spit in the face to me, and just goes to the point even more that this guy can't in any way be involved in any kind of Gaza that exists after the end of the war. I know, Razi, in a sense, I think you want there to be no Gaza after the war, but probably Israel's going to allow there to be some kind of Gaza city there. And this guy, I think,
I want there to be a Gaza. I want the Gaza resort, hotel, and casino. We've spoken about this before on the show.
Okay, sure, okay, but any Gaza city that there is after the war, this guy can't be there, and partly not just because he says things which are offensive like that, but partly to your point that he fundamentally doesn't get that it's the Gazan way of life which is the instigator of this whole problem.
I think he fully gets it, by the way. He knows what, you know, he's the mayor, like, but
sure.
But yeah, there have always been things that Palestinians, Arafat was the master of this. Say some things in Arabic, say different things in English, and you know, the West, the people in the West who want to believe something will believe it. Marco.
Yeah, it's a form of lost in translation, isn't it? But I would like to go back to the numbers that the Hamas authorities keep giving us, a very good update of victims, so-called victims. The 20,000 number that I keep talking about, and you know, every day it goes up and it's reported by the media here in the West, it's actually not a number of civilians. It's they lump together the people who are hiding in the bunkers, building missiles and lobbing missiles and shooting at the IDF, together with some people that happen to be in a mosque or a church or a hospital where these animals hide their infrastructure, their war infrastructure. So even the 20,000 number, even if it's true, is totally misleading. And this op-ed from the New York Times, it's just a crass attempt from the paper itself and the people behind the paper to create effectively a case for a ceasefire. They're effectively taking every single stupid argument that has been bandied around in the last few months and repeated it, giving me some example. For example, the retaliation rhetoric. It's not retaliation, it's war because you attacked Israel in the first place, so live with it. The way the innocents are hit. Well, yeah, you call them innocent. I know there is an episode in the next few days about this, but Israel is responding to a threat, to an attack, using surgical strikes. How surgical are the strikes coming from Gaza, from people in Gaza, Hamas that is lobbing missiles across to Israel? Do they really care if they hit a real school or a real hospital? I don't think so. But Israel is held to account every time somebody dies. All the series of disingenuous twisting of words or events is just done on purpose in order to push the narrative of the ceasefire. And I hope people are a bit clever and this can see through it, because it's also crass, done in a very stupid way.
Yeah, you've got to look at the speaker to start with. I mean, he's been mayor since 2019. Was he appointed by an open process of primaries? Could anyone stand for mayor at that point? No. Hamas picked him because Hamas is what he is. And therefore, he's speaking exactly the words of Hamas in this op-ed, whether he wrote them himself or not. And when we're looking at the culture and the infrastructure of Gaza, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the vast tunnel network? That's the only infrastructure of enormous effort that they've gone into. And when we're talking about culture, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the segregation of the sexes in every setting? Are we talking about the fact that within schools there's enormous caches of weapons, as we've just seen the IDF showing footage of in a particular school laid out in the center of the school? They managed to bring all of the weapons hidden in that school, and it's a vast cache of grenades and automatic weapons and mortars and all the rest of it. And what are the cultural elements that they're not talking about as well? They're not talking about the real cultural elements of the Re'im Music Festival, for example, are they, on the other side of the border? They're not talking about the cultural events that were destroyed on October the 7th and as part of the wider events of that day caused by Hamas. No, they're certainly not. So it's so selective, it's so lopsided, it's so disjointed, and it's tailored to its audience, and its audience only wants to hear one thing anyway, so they're ready to sign their names on petitions and donate towards Palestine, and that's the purpose of the article and what it will probably largely achieve.
Yeah. I want to thank our super chatters quickly. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, James Valiant. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Jeff Bannister. And also not a super chatter today, but Ginger Clark says, good show. Don't forget to like it if you agree. Yeah, like it and also share it. That's important. That's helpful. And yeah, back to the op-ed. So he goes on and on at the beginning, saying how beautiful the culture is and how he was inspired and how Bill Clinton came to visit when there was a new cultural center that was now destroyed. That was a part of the theme in the article. And again, this completely ignores the connection between what that culture is and the result of that culture that Israel has experienced and that has led Israel to go on this military operation. Later on, he says, where is it? You mentioned the trees. So he says, why did the Israeli tanks destroy so many trees, electricity poles, cars, water mains? Why would Israel hit a UN school? That was the next one. I mean, he knows exactly why Israel would hit a UN school. He knows that UN schools are where, he runs the city. He knows that UN schools are where they can hide, because if they hide there and Israel acts, then they can say, why would Israel hit a UN school? So again, the fact that he says this is not a surprise, it would be a surprise if he didn't. The fact that the New York Times, that shouldn't be a surprise, but the fact that they publish it, it's shocking. It's shocking that this is a major newspaper in the West and that is held in high regard and allows this kind of stuff in its pages. Morgan.
I don't have too much else to add, except I guess just reiterating the point. He laments at the beginning the destruction of, amongst other things, the Gazan zoo and all its animals there. And, alongside the deaths of all these trees. And clearly, Israel's no longer just guilty for the death of innocent civilians, it's guilty for the death of innocent zebras and hyenas and whatever else was in there, along with all the pretty conifers. It's just a bit silly, to be honest. And I agree with you, Reza, that I think essentially it's there to play upon the emotions of the New York Times readers that, oh, this is really sad. Why is Israel being so brutal? That's basically what it's trying to achieve. And it's, I don't have anything else different to add, really. It's really reprehensible that the New York Times has chosen to publish it.
Marco.
Well, to be honest, knowing the history of the New York Times, his previous CEO and chairman was the guy who was chairman of the BBC and then chairman of Channel 4. So it's got a history of lefty, progressive, urban nuttiness. So I'm not surprised that they actually follow this line, which is exactly the line of again, the Labour Party. They pretend to be pro-Israel, but actually, when it comes to Jewish, they know which side they're on. And again, it always comes across through the media, through the BBC, through most of the Western media. And it's so I'm surprised that when there is we've all seen the clips from Andy Murray and Cenk. When it comes
Douglas Murray.
That's Douglas Murray. Andy Murray, you can see different clips of him, but
Douglas Murray and Cenk. When it comes to Jewish, the left always comes against them, and it seems to be a law, a physical law that comes into play here, and they don't disappoint. That's what they do.
To me, what strikes me is a shameless, willful ignorance of certain facts all the time and relentlessly. Why are hospitals being hit? Why are schools being hit? Why are mosques being hit? Well, you don't need to just follow the money. You need to follow the cables, because the cables disappear down a tunnel right under the hospital, and reveal where the network starts and where the bases are underneath, and it's all there. The reasons have been shown on footage by the IDF, very carefully showing live and continuous unedited footage to show how tunnels are accessed, where they're hidden, and the infrastructure under which they're hidden, which is precisely the infrastructure which people decry being hit. And it's precisely the human shield infrastructure used by Hamas to hide and to use the morality of the West against itself.
Thanks, Apollo Zeus. Thank you, Stephen Harper, for the super chats as well. So about a 25-minute subway ride south of where the New York Times sits is Wall Street, and the Wall Street Journal also published an op-ed yesterday. So this op-ed was by Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister. This one pissed me off at the title, as did the other one. But the title here is "Our 3 Prerequisites for Peace," and then it says we must destroy Hamas, demilitarize Gaza, and de-radicalize the whole Palestinian society. I don't necessarily have a problem with any of that. I wouldn't want Gaza demilitarized in the sense that I would want a military there, but I understand the meaning is that there will be no weapons among the Palestinians. The fact that Israel is talking about peace at this point is to me unacceptable. You don't talk, and Israel didn't talk at the beginning. They actually spoke about victory, which is something in previous military operations, including ones conducted under Netanyahu, Israel didn't use the word victory. They used we have goals and we want to achieve our goals in this operation, and nobody ever talked about the destruction of Hamas, even when the operation was against Hamas. I like the fact that now that has changed, but no, the way towards peace is absolute military victory, and of course, not just against the people in Gaza. So I'll have a bit more to say about that in a minute, but let's go to Richard.
Okay, well, I think let's focus on some of the good to start with, because there is some good in here, and we need to shine a light on that as well. I think the destruction of Hamas that he points out contains 2 elements. It contains the military destruction and the political destruction. The political infrastructure he's talking about, as well as the military. And I think that's an important element of this, because that has to cover the funding of Hamas from beyond the Gaza borders itself. It has to the interrelationship between other organizations such as Hezbollah, and of course wider countries such as Qatar. Whether he actually means all that remains to be seen. But if you are going to destroy the political infrastructure of Hamas, it does necessitate all of those elements. It can't just involve destroying where rockets are launched from, and a few weapons here and there, and flattening or flooding some tunnels. That is not sufficient. So if he means all that, And then the first point is a point well made. I could go on, but I'm sure we'll come back. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
I personally found this this piece from Netanyahu quite positively, to be honest. It looks like he's found some notes from the book he wrote years ago. Probably remind himself of how to win a war. And of course, I think he also is playing the Christmas card here, trying to talk to people in a language which doesn't rattle all the lefties and all the Hamas supporters in the West. And I particularly like the fact that when he talks about the destruction of Hamas, he brings in UK, US, France, and Germany, all the people that seem to be wavering. Effectively, he puts them on the spot and says, you know, to try and negate what I'm saying now, if you got the guts, given that they've been playing friends of Israel while at the same time signing deal left, right, and center with Qatar and all those kind of people. So I think he kind of might have played a diplomatic blinder here. So good for him. And as Raza said, I hope his intention is still war. War with the end of ultimate victory, nothing else but victory.
Morgan, you're muted.
I just swore, so it was pretty good that was on mute, actually. When you picked out this article, I was also I was initially kind of a bit surprised because I read it and thought that's pretty good. I don't know why Razi wants to tear this apart, but so I'll also reiterate that I thought there was lots of good stuff in this. It's disappointing. I mean, I think this goes to what Marco was saying, is that Netanyahu clearly, when he's sort of giving a speech or when he's setting something into writing, can say all the right things and can say them really quite well and quite emotively and quite punchily and so on. So that if anyone goes and finds this article, I think what you do find is actually a pretty good blueprint for peace or for victory, or however you want to put it. So I think that's all very good. However, so often Netanyahu clearly very much lets himself down in practice. He doesn't actually do a lot of these things, and it would be really nice if he actually does end up doing these things, if he really conducts the war in this way. I agree with you about the point about peace, Razi, that was the bit that stuck out as a bit objectionable. They shouldn't really be orientating themselves that way. It should be the three principles we have for victory, what constitutes us winning this war. However, I suspect this is basically coming from them having too much of an eye towards the international community. If rhetorically the international community perceives them as being too triumphalist, too saber wrestling or whatever, then basically they're going to suffer a lot more diplomatically. And probably if you're in the position of the Israeli government, that might be an understandable thing to do, but they need to be really firm about the fact that they need to really stand up to the international community as much as they can and say, like, no, this is actually very reasonable what we're doing here, and this is how we would need to defend ourselves, and how actually many of the countries in the international community would defend themselves in the same position. Some wouldn't. However, that's how a country like Britain probably would act if it were put in the same position, and Britain should not criticize Israel when it's in the same position. So those were my initial thoughts on his article.
So yeah, there's a lot of good in the article, a lot of things that should be done. Here are my problems. First of all, it's written by Netanyahu, who needs to stop talking and start doing. But the first paragraph here, Hamas must be destroyed, Gaza must be demilitarized, and Palestinian society must be de-radicalized. These are the three prerequisites for peace between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors in Gaza. So first of all, why are you singling out Gaza? I mean, so the Palestinian society is the same in Gaza and the West Bank. It's the same society, it's the same culture, and it's the same, the same ideas that Netanyahu has tried in the past. So there's two parts here. There's the ideas Netanyahu has expressed in the past, as you mentioned in his books, and then there is what he actually has done in the past. And we talked about that on the Daily Objective, how he has a long history of saying that something is bad and then doing it and doubling down on it. So that's my problem. That my other problem is, again, him saying, look, this is what needs to be done in Gaza. This is what needs to be done for there to be peace, which I've said. I think Gaza, at the very least, Gaza society, Palestinian society, should not continue to exist as it was there at all. Like that's a basic thing. And that sends a message to Israel's enemies. And this is another big part, is that it's not just the Palestinians. It's the Palestinians supported, funded by Iran. It's Hezbollah, who can do much more harm than the Palestinians, can, even if they all joined in together. It's Israel's enemies in Yemen, elsewhere in the Middle East. So yeah, Netanyahu from day one wanted to do as little as he could in this war. Now, as little as he could was still more than he has done in the past, because the least you can do is still, the bar is higher now than it was in the past. But he is ignoring the wider problem here, I think, and the wider enemy. Richard.
Yeah, I mean, it's Islam that needs to be de-radicalized, even if that's even possible. And you can't focus on Gaza in a vacuum. You've got to consider all of the countries that surround it and all of the culture that surrounds it. I mean, when he's talking about de-radicalizing the culture, he's talking about things like what's taught in mosques and schools, and it being not teaching, the martyrdom of death or the anti-life or the Jew hatred. And of course, all of those things should be tackled, and all of those things should be eradicated from what's taught to young people, so that the next generation stands a chance of seeing some form of reason and not the irrational hatred that they've been taught to so far. But if that's only going to be on a small geographical strip that is the Gaza Strip, then it ain't going to change nothing longer term. And the problem is going to persist all around. So that's a far harder thing to tackle. And of course, you need to start with tackling the problem within your own borders, within the borders of Israel. So yes, it is the place to start, but it is only a starting point.
But also another positive thing is that it seems to rule out the involvement of the Palestinian Authority, it's a good start. I mean, effectively laying the ground for, we're not going to have people who cheered for October the 7th events involved into any management of the Gaza Strip after we're done with them. It's only a good thing. And it's hard to second guess what Netanyahu is going to do. I don't know whether he realizes his career is over, so he wants to leave with a decent legacy of some kind. But starting with these premises, if he sticks with it, it's probably a good start.
All right, I'll tell you why the part about the Palestinian Authority actually pissed me off. But Morgan, you can go first, and then I'll.
So, I mean, well, I'm interested here because I also thought the Palestinian Authority bit was pretty good, in the sense that it needs to be recognized that the Palestinian Authority really are part of the problem as well. So I'm interested to hear that. I guess part of what depressed me reading it is from a Christmas present, I got a political memoir of a British politician, right, that I was reading. And this is a guy who considers himself very much in the center ground of British politics. And he's someone who is very popular at the moment and who commands a lot of interest from the media, and who is kind of signaling a return to mainstream politics relatively soon, and probably could do that very well in that. And I was just reflecting on how this guy would probably read this article by Netanyahu and think, God, this is crazy far-right stuff. And how depressing that is, in the sense that this is a guy whose opinions are basically going to be reflected in most of the actual ruling British politicians and much of the ruling politicians in the Western world. And they would probably read Netanyahu's article and think, God, this is really radical. Whereas actually a lot of it's very reasonable and perhaps doesn't go far enough in certain respects. But I was depressed by just how much our politicians are so far away from being anything like this. Even this kind of basically reasonable article is coming from Netanyahu, who himself is a bit of a rubbish figure. So yeah, there's a lot in the news at the moment to get one down, and this got me down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in Britain, there's this unique form of politeness where you can say about somebody like Netanyahu, he's a bit of a rubbish figure, and I would put it in words that I probably shouldn't use. But yeah, this is when I look at the Palestinian Authority part, and actually let me read that and then say what I think about it. He says the expectation that the Palestinian Authority will demilitarize Gaza is a pipe dream. It currently funds and glorifies terrorism in Judea and Samaria, and that's what the West in the West is commonly referred to as the West Bank, and educates Palestinian children to seek the destruction of Israel. Not surprisingly, it has shown neither the capability nor the will to demilitarize Gaza, and it goes on and on. So my problem is not that I disagree with anything he says; it's that it's coming from Netanyahu. So Netanyahu said, or not him, but some Israeli official said, allegedly right after October 7th to Egypt, if you send any fuel trucks to Gaza, we will bomb them. Israel said they're going to cut water and electricity to Gaza. They said no humanitarian aid until you release the hostages. I know Netanyahu, unfortunately, well enough because I've seen his career long enough that the fact that he mentions this makes me think that it is going to happen, and it's some sort of politician's way of saying, okay, now I've already said this, and here I'm going to make a concession on this, so you make a concession on something else. So again, as an article, if this was written by somebody who isn't Netanyahu, a lot of it would be okay. I would still have an issue with not including the wider region or at least the Palestinian people as the problem. But no, Netanyahu can't be trusted on any of these things. And I want him, like I said, what I want to see from Netanyahu is action. I want him to stop talking, and then I want him to write whatever op-eds explaining why we had to, Hamas was hiding behind civilians. Say what you have to say for what for diplomatic political reasons, but act first.
But when he's talking about the PLO, he's talking to Biden, really, isn't he? Because isn't it Biden that's in his lame-assed understanding of the politics is pushing the idea that the future of Gaza could be run by somebody such as, and the only name you can pull out the air is the PLO. So isn't it good that he's at least tackling that head on, albeit in the context you just described?
Yeah. So in a very limited context, I would say it can be seen as good as in it's better than him not neither saying nor doing on the one hand, because it's a type of action to say something, when you're prime minister. But seeing as it is Netanyahu and seeing his history, what I'd like to see from Netanyahu is action, military action against the Palestinian Authority. That would be good. If they are really a part of the problem, as he says, and if the fact that Israel has been sleeping on the job, while October 7th was planned, then where is this? Where is October 7th as a wake-up call to say we can't allow this kind of thinking at all? Not just we have to go after the particular people who did October 7th, but anybody who would consider that as part of their their plan is we will act preemptively against them. And again, it's not preemptive because they have done enough.
I think is there maybe a bit of a problem in the sense in our culture in general, and the idea which you could attack someone for what they think is frowned upon, is viewed as essentially kind of something you can't do, even if those ideas are what led to the war in the first place. I think if he phrased it that way, he would probably be the victim of a huge amount of scrutiny of Netanyahu thinks you can kill people for what they think, and then that'll be reprinted, and then it'll be some huge kind of disaster.
So I don't know to what extent this is reported, but there's things going on daily in Judea and Samaria. Israeli military is acting there. They're acting in a pinpoint way as they always do, unless there's justification for something wider specifically there. But the ideas are acted on, and they have been acted on. And as we said in the Daily Objective, they have been acted on more and more since the signing of the Oslo Accords 30 years ago. So this has gotten worse. It got worse before the Oslo Accords, but it's gotten a lot worse since then. And they're not being attacked for if Israel actually went after Palestinians of the West Bank, went after Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, went after the Houthis in Yemen, went after Iran. All of that is going after people for their actions, and acknowledging that their actions are a reason to believe much more serious action would come if and when they believe they can do that successfully.
Sure. It's just what you sounded. So I completely agree that he should kind of make that case. But do you remember I think was it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Sam Harris came under like a huge amount of scrutiny because he argued in a philosophy class that you could, if you think about it in a certain way, nuke people for holding certain beliefs in the sense. I think the way he made the case was that if those beliefs are leading you to a war and then you nuke them in the war, you're nuking them in effect because of what they believe. And there was this huge amount of controversy about that. I think basically because people didn't want to be able to make the connection between the beliefs that you hold and then the actions that you're taking from, is part of the reason why Netanyahu's sort of not making the case because of a similar kind of problem. Maybe he doesn't even conceive it that way.
Well, so I certainly think that he's worried about how it would be seen in the West. And again, I've said the serious military action should have been taken on October 7th, October 8th, and be done with it. But let's give this example. Let's say Hezbollah didn't attack the U.S. and Israel via its proxies, didn't sponsor terrorism. All they did was say, we will, as they do often, that they are going to wipe Israel off the map, and we're building a nuclear bomb. That is sufficient. That is a good enough reason for you to act preemptively. If they say they're going to do that, I mean, that's expressing ideas, but it's also it's a clear threat. So, yeah, the fact that he would be in trouble diplomatically and that Israel would be in trouble, with sanctions and so on, there's very little doubt or no doubt about that if Israel acted the way I suggest they should. But again, I think that death is worse. Death is worse than whatever results you get from sanctions.
I guess, look, and I agree with that. I guess just in the sense there's almost like there's almost something. I think the philosophical problem we're identifying there is almost so widespread in the culture that I feel almost hopeless at suggesting that they even make the case that way. If you see what I'm saying, like I don't know if they would even think that that's the right way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, the case should be made after the fact. That's my point. It should have been made on October 9th after many parts of the Middle East were in actual rubble, as opposed to what the mayor of Gaza says. Marco.
Well, I'm not privy to foreign policy briefs and stuff like that, but there've been lately a few developments in the area. For example, the strike in Syria, who took out an Iranian general, and the fact that the Houthis are throwing missiles to Western boats and effectively attacking Western interests. The United States seems to have been, as James was saying earlier on, seems to have been a bit more active in responding to these things. Now, hopefully, it's not just posturing and trying to show that they're there, just limiting to deterrence, really. But I wonder whether Netanyahu knows that it's forming a sort of coalition of Western powers who are a bit fed up or begin to feel threatened by Iran and its cronies, really. Turns out that after, I think on the 7th, on the 8th or on the 9th of November, Netanyahu wanted to strike Hezbollah, but it was stopped by Biden, who questioned the validity of the intelligence he was working on.
So it was Netanyahu's defense minister who wanted to strike against Hezbollah preemptively, and Netanyahu, this is according to that report, Netanyahu said no because the Americans wouldn't let us, or something to that effect.
Yeah, and exactly for that reason. I think that if Netanyahu changes his tune slightly, I suspect it might be because there is a wider coalition forming, and perhaps they're gonna go after some of the troublemakers, even if they're not gonna hit Iran itself. Although, if you read the latest reports from the International Atomic Energy Agency or Authority, whatever it's called, from the UN, Iran is just seconds away from having weapon grade uranium, and they already have about 40 times more than the agreed amount they're allowed to have from the accord from 2015. So already they've broken those agreement by 40 times. They got about 4,000 kilograms, and they're allowed to have 200 kilograms, something like that. So that to me is enough to hit them and flatten whatever mountain or facility that they're enriched uranium. But still, there's not enough for the West. So hopefully, at least, if they haven't got the spine to attack Iran and stop them at this point before it's too late, hopefully they're going to start attacking at least their proxies. I don't know, I'm just speculating. As I said, I haven't got access to this kind of information, but I hope so.
I hope so as well. And by the way, I don't want access to that kind of information. As I've said, like, I want to see it happening. I hate it when they advertise in advance what military action they're supposedly going to take, and then they end up not taking it. And I think that's worse. Richard.
I think one of the reasons that we're coming at this from slightly different emphases or perspectives is that you're dissatisfied with what Netanyahu's doing and saying and then doing. And we are, in thinking of our own leaders, thinking of leaders like Sunak or Macron, or I'll try not to spit, David Cameron, we're thinking of how I wish they would say some of what Netanyahu is saying, at least, but because they're not even managing to do that here. I mean, I picked out a quote from this op-ed of Netanyahu's where he says, Israel is fighting the bigger battle of the civilized world versus barbarism. Now, that's the crux of the matter, isn't it? That's precisely why this channel has had such a focus on the war in Israel for the months that we have, because that's the crucial issue here. And you don't hear enough of that said outside of the mouths of Western leaders. Netanyahu is one of the only people saying that so clearly. And I wish other people would say that and understand what it means, because then we would see more of the action beyond the borders of Israel that are necessary, including, as Marco was referencing there, making sure that Iran doesn't get the nuclear weapons, which are going to change the entire dynamic of what we're all facing.
Thank you, Ginger Clark, for the super chat. She says, thank you for another informative discussion. I have to say, Rishi Sunak is also my leader, not by choice. By choice of living here, not by choice of, he wouldn't be my first choice. His predecessor was higher up on my list of preferred leaders. But yeah, that's another thing. And maybe this is definitely a discussion for another day, but maybe in the minutes we have left, we can kind of go over this quickly. Rishi Sunak is facing an election next year, which he is likely to lose, and Biden is facing an election which he might lose. And in both cases, I have to say, as far as Israel is concerned, I'm worried that the other option is worse than the current option. When I say in the UK, I mean the Labour Party. Obviously, in the US, I'm referring to Trump, not any of Trump's opponents. But like Nikki Haley, if Nikki Haley became president, I would be calm. But at least as far as the situation in the Middle East is concerned, I hope she can influence Netanyahu or whoever is leader then in Israel. But yeah, Israel needs to act also relatively quickly, I think, in case somebody worse comes along. Anybody, Richard, your thoughts on that? Again, we have a few minutes left, so we might have to do a follow-up on this. But
I think we should do a follow-up on this, because there's much to pull out of here. The only thing I'm itching to say is that I assume when you're talking about the predecessor of Rishi Sunak, you're talking about Liz Truss, although she was there for 10 minutes rather than Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
I feel that point needs making, but yes, yeah. And it does make you wonder what the response would be were you faced with a different set of leadership than you are at the moment, and whether some of what's happening, particularly, I mean, look at the weakness of the US in terms of their leadership. Would any of this be occurring to the extent that it is if there wasn't such a lousy head of both parties in the United States? It's hard to see that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that this conflict is not about a regional squabble. It's become much more than this. It's about, do we want to have a civilized society? Do we want to have a more Western, freer society? Or do we want to go back to the Middle Ages like these theocrat nutters want to do with you, imposing Islam, Sharia law, all this kind of stuff? We have to bear in mind that it's not about Goodism versus, I can't be bothered, or it's not a Christmas tale, this one. We're literally talking about civilization versus a bunch of animals who want to go back to the caves. Whether these are environmentalists or Islamists, it doesn't matter. The result is the same. So let's bear in mind where's the moral cases, which is on Israel's side, and pick the right size. It's everybody's choice to see where reason will lead you, and Israel is obviously the moral agent here.
Morgan.
I don't have too much else to add, I suppose. Just on, I guess, whether we would get something different with different leaders. I suspect we would, but I guess something that I'm dreading in the future is that when Keir Starmer is inevitably the next prime minister of this country, I think he's going to, because he's aiming for a kind of centrist victory in the election, I think once he's in office, he's going to feel the need to flex his lefty credentials again. And alongside giving away the Parthenon marbles, I think that might entail some rather poor things for Israeli relations. So, I'm filled with foreboding about the future of the conflict. Hopefully won't be going on by the time the next general election happens. But for anything else that is happening in its aftermath, I don't think it bodes well.
Yeah, Liz Truss, when she was prime minister, said that she would move the British embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel's capital, Jerusalem. Rishi Sunak, not Rishi, what's his name? Keir Starmer might move it to Uganda or somewhere where he thinks where the Jews should go. But anyway, we will continue to try to counter that as much as possible on this channel. And so again, if you think this content is valuable, please make sure to like the video, share it, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe to it and watch our content that's coming up tomorrow, the Daily Objective. Morgan and I are going to talk about the settlements that we keep hearing are the obstacle to peace. Oddly enough, the people who say that don't really think that terrorism is much of an obstacle to peace. They think it's kind of a response to settlements, maybe. And then tomorrow on the reality show, for the first time since the start of the war, we have an episode that is not about the war, an episode of one of the two major shows, the daily shows. That is the ARCUK Awards. That is an annual tradition here. We are doing it this year as well. And tune in for that. There will be voting on each award, so you should tune in live if you can. If not, it'll still be interesting to watch later. And then Thursday we have the rematch from last Wednesday's episode of the reality show, which was titled "The Palestinian People Are the Problem." We had some disagreements there. We will talk about it again. The title of that episode is "Are There Innocent Civilians in Gaza?" So it's definitely going to be an interesting episode. So I hope you join us for all that. Thank you again, and see you back here tomorrow.